August 1799. The Wilderness Road, cutting through the forests of Kentucky. A traveler discovers something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. A body, gutted, disemboweled, the chest cavity torn open and filled with stones, then the whole thing weighted down and thrown into a river. But the stones weren't heavy enough, and the corpse has floated to the surface. This isn't the first body found like this. It won't be the last. Over the next few months, more bodies will appear along the frontier trails of Tennessee and Kentucky. Men, women, children, it doesn't matter. All killed with savage brutality. All mutilated. Some decapitated. Some disemboweled and weighted with stones. Some simply bludgeoned beyond recognition. The frontier is a dangerous place in 1799. There are bears, wolves, hostile encounters, accidents. People die all the time. But this is different. This is methodical. This is pleasure. Two men are doing this. Brothers. Micajah Harpe and Wiley Harpe. They're killing for no reason anyone can understand. Not for money. Not for revenge. Not even for supplies. They're killing because they enjoy it. They're America's first documented serial killers. And their story is so disturbing, so brutal, that it's been largely erased from history. Too dark even for a nation that loves its outlaw legends. By the time they're stopped, they'll have murdered at least 40 people. Probably more. Women they raped and killed. Children they bashed against trees. Fellow travelers they befriended and then butchered. This is the story the history books don't want to tell you. Who were they? The Harpe brothers, Micajah Big Harpe and Wiley Little Harpe, emerged from the chaos of the American Revolution. And here's the first disturbing thing. They probably weren't actually brothers. Most historians now believe they were cousins, possibly from a loyalist family in North Carolina. During the Revolution, they sided with the British. Not out of political conviction, they saw it as an opportunity. They joined loyalist militia units and Native American raiding parties that attacked frontier settlements. And they discovered something about themselves. They liked killing. The Revolution ended in 1783. The British lost. Loyalists who'd committed atrocities during the war faced retaliation. So the Harpes disappeared into the frontier, into the wilderness beyond the Appalachian Mountains where law was scarce and questions were rare. They took wives. Some accounts say they kidnapped them. Others say the women followed them willingly. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The women were likely escaping their own desperate situations and saw the Harpes as protection. They had no idea what they were getting into. By the mid-1790s, the Harpes were living somewhere in the wilderness of eastern Tennessee and Kentucky. They had a small settlement, a cabin, children. From the outside, they looked like any other frontier family trying to survive in the wilderness. But they weren't trying to survive. They were hunting. The frontier context. To understand how the Harpes operated, you need to understand the American frontier in the 1790s. After the Revolution, thousands of settlers were pushing west beyond the Appalachians into what's now Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio. The Wilderness Road, a trail blazed by Daniel Boone, became the main route for migration. Families would pack everything they owned into wagons or onto horses and travel hundreds of miles through dense forest to reach new settlements. It was incredibly dangerous. The trail wound through mountains and thick woods. There were river crossings, cliffs, wild animals. And not everyone on the trail was friendly. There were bandits, groups of outlaws who robbed travelers. There were river pirates on the Ohio River who attacked boats. There were occasional violent encounters with Native American groups defending their land. People disappeared on the frontier all the time. Bodies found in the woods weren't unusual. This is what the Harpes exploited. They could kill people on isolated stretches of the Wilderness Road and everyone would assume it was bandits or accidents or anything other than what it actually was. Methodical, sadistic murder. The first confirmed kills. The exact number of their victims will never be known. The Harpes themselves claimed over 40 kills before they were caught. Some historians think it was higher, possibly more than 50. But we can trace the confirmed killings to around 1797. A man named Johnson was found dead near the Harpe cabin. The community was suspicious. The Harpes had a reputation as strange, violent men, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge them. The Harpes fled deeper into the wilderness. What followed was a killing spree that lasted nearly 2 years. They had a pattern. They'd travel along the wilderness road or near settlements, looking for victims. Sometimes they'd befriend travelers, camp with them, share meals. Then, in the night, they'd murder everyone. Men, women, children, entire families wiped out. Other times, they'd simply ambush people on isolated stretches of trail, beat them to death, strangle them, shoot them. It varied. What didn't vary was the savagery. Here's what makes them different from ordinary frontier violence. They weren't robbing people. Often they'd leave valuables on the bodies. They weren't killing over disputes or revenge. They were killing strangers who'd done nothing to them, and they seemed to enjoy it. Accounts from people who knew them described the brothers laughing while they killed, making jokes, showing no remorse whatsoever. The mutilations. Warning. This section describes extreme violence. The Harpes didn't just kill people. They mutilated them, and there was a horrifying consistency to some of their methods. Their signature move was disemboweling victims and filling the chest cavity with stones, then throwing the body into a river. The weight was meant to keep the body submerged. They didn't want their victims found, but they weren't very good at it. The stones often weren't heavy enough, and the bodies would surface downstream. That's how many victims were discovered. Bloated, rotting corpses bobbing in the river. They also decapitated some victims. One of the most infamous cases involved them bashing an infant against a tree because the baby's crying annoyed them. The child belonged to one of their own wives. Yes, they killed their own child because it was crying. This level of depravity was unprecedented in American crime. There had been murderers before, obviously. There had been brutal killings. But this was different. This was sustained, methodical, pleasure-driven killing that lasted years. They were serial killers before anyone had a term for it. The body count rises. By early 1799, bodies are appearing with increasing frequency across the Kentucky and Tennessee frontier. The authorities, what little authority exists in this lawless region, start to realize they have a serious problem. But catching the Harpes is nearly impossible. The frontier is vast, mostly unmapped wilderness. There are no police forces, no communication networks. Each settlement is isolated, and travelers between settlements are vulnerable. The Harpes can kill someone in Kentucky, be in Tennessee 2 days later, and no one can coordinate a response. Let me walk you through some of their confirmed victims to give you a sense of the horror. The Trowbridge family. In the spring of 1799, the Harpes encountered Stephen Langford on the Wilderness Road. They befriended him, traveled with him. When he let his guard down, they beat him to death and threw his body off a cliff. A few days later, they came upon a man named William Ballard. Same pattern, pretend to be friendly, then murder him when convenient. They took his horse but left his money. Then they found the Trowbridge family. A man, his wife, and their child traveling in a wagon. The Harpes joined their camp. That night they killed all three, the entire family. They smashed the infant's head against a tree. Remember, these weren't heat-of-the-moment killings. These were calculated. The Harpes would spend hours, sometimes days, with their victims before deciding to kill them. They'd share meals, tell stories, build trust. And then they'd strike. Skeggs and Bates. In Kentucky, they encountered 2 men named Skeggs and Bates who were traveling together. The Harpes joined them. Over several days of travel, they formed what seemed like a genuine friendship. The 4 men camped together, hunted together. Then one night, the Harpes murdered both men while they slept. They took the time to disembowel the bodies and fill them with stones before throwing them in a river. Why? There's no reason. Skeggs and Bates had done nothing to provoke this. They had welcomed the Harpes, shared their supplies, and the Harpes killed them for it. This is what makes serial killers so terrifying. The lack of comprehensible motive. We understand killing in self-defense. We understand killing for money, or revenge, or in the heat of passion. But killing for pleasure? Killing because the opportunity presents itself? That's incomprehensible. The Mason gang connection. At some point in their rampage, the Harpes connected with a more traditional criminal group, the Mason gang, led by a man named Samuel Mason. Mason was a river pirate. His gang operated on the Ohio River, attacking flatboats carrying settlers and goods. They were violent criminals, yes, but they were also organized and business-minded. They robbed people for profit. They had a code. The Harpes had no code. The gang quickly realized the brothers were liabilities. They killed indiscriminately, drawing attention. They were savage in ways that even hardened criminals found disturbing. There are accounts of Mason gang members being horrified by what the Harpes did. Think about that. River pirates. Men who made their living robbing and sometimes killing travelers. Found the Harpes too violent, too depraved. The Harpes' association with the Mason gang was brief. Either they left or were pushed out. But during their time with the gang, they likely killed several people at the gang's Cave-in Rock hideout on the Ohio River. The women. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Harpe story is the role of their wives. The brothers traveled with several women. Some sources say 3, others say more. These women were technically the Harpes' wives, though the relationships were probably closer to captivity. The women witnessed the murders. They helped dispose of bodies. They were present when the Harpes killed children, including one of their own. Did they participate willingly? Were they coerced? Were they too terrified to leave? Probably all of the above at different times. Frontier life made women extremely vulnerable. Leaving the Harpes might have meant death from exposure, starvation, or attack by wild animals. The women were trapped by circumstance and fear. But some accounts suggest at least one of the women, Susan Roberts, who was Big Harpe's wife, was an active participant. She allegedly helped lure victims and assisted in disposing of bodies. After the Harpes were caught, the women were arrested as accomplices. But ultimately, they were released. The authorities didn't quite know what to do with them. Were they victims? Accomplices? Both? The women disappeared into history after that. We don't know what happened to them. The turning point. By the summer of 1799, the frontier is in a state of panic. Word has spread about the bodies turning up along the wilderness road and in the rivers. People are traveling in larger groups for safety. Settlements are organizing armed patrols. The Harpes have become infamous, but no one knows who they are. There are descriptions, 2 large, rough-looking men traveling with several women, but that describes half the people on the frontier. Then they make a mistake. In July 1799, the Harpes killed a man named Major William Love near Robertson County, Tennessee. Love was a respected settler, a community leader. His murder finally galvanizes a serious response. Posse forms, led by a man named John Leeper, who had his own reasons to hate the Harpes, as they killed someone close to him. The posse begins tracking the brothers through the wilderness. The Harpes, perhaps sensing danger, flee north toward Kentucky. But the posse is relentless. They're tracking not just 2 men now, they're hunting monsters. The chase. The posse tracks the Harpes through dense Kentucky forest. It's August, brutally hot. The woods thick with undergrowth. The Harpes are moving fast, but they're encumbered by the women and children traveling with them. The posse is maybe a dozen men, all armed, all motivated. They've seen the bodies. They've heard the stories. They know what they're chasing. John Leeper is leading them. He's not a lawman. There are no real lawmen on the frontier. He's just a man who wants revenge and justice. His intensity drives the posse forward even when the trail goes cold. For days they track through the wilderness. They find abandoned campsites, signs of passage. The Harpes are just ahead, always just ahead. The confrontation. August 24th, 1799. Near the town of Robertson County, Kentucky. The posse spots smoke from a campfire. They approach carefully, quietly. Through the trees they see the Harpes camp. The women are there, the children, and the 2 brothers sitting by the fire. The posse spreads out, surrounding the camp. Then they charge. The Harpes grab their rifles and run. They're trying to reach their horses, to escape into the forest. But the posse is faster. Shots ring out. Big Harpe Makaja is hit. He goes down. Little Harpe Wiley makes it to a horse and escapes into the woods. The posse lets him go, focusing on Big Harpe. Makaja Harpe is badly wounded, shot in the leg and back. He's lying on the ground, bleeding out. The posse surrounds him. The execution. What happens next is brutal. But given what the Harpes had done, perhaps it was inevitable. John Leeper approaches Big Harpe. The man is still alive, conscious. Leeper asks him, "How many people have you killed?" Big Harpe's alleged response, "Enough to make a considerable pile if they were all here." He doesn't deny anything. He doesn't beg for mercy. He's proud. Leeper pulls out a knife. He's not going to let Big Harpe die slowly from his wounds. He's going to make this personal. Big Harpe realizes what's about to happen. According to accounts, he begs, "You're welcome to take my life, but please, don't cut off my head." Leeper ignores him. He begins sawing at Big Harpe's neck with his knife. The man is still alive, still conscious. Takes several minutes. Big Harpe screams, chokes on his own blood, and finally dies. Leeper finishes cutting off the head. He holds it up for the posse to see. Then he takes the head and nails it to a tree at a fork in the road. A warning, a trophy, a message. That spot becomes known as Harpe's Head. The name stuck for decades. The skull reportedly stayed nailed to that tree for years, bleaching in the sun, a reminder of frontier justice. Little Harpe escapes. Wily Harpe, Little Harpe manages to escape. He rides hard, abandoning the women, abandoning everything. He knows his brother is dead or soon will be. He knows the frontier now knows who they are and what they've done. For now he's free, but we'll return to him later. The women's fate. The posse captures the women and children at the camp. They're arrested as accomplices to murder. At trial, the women testify about what they witnessed. Some of their testimony is harrowing. They describe murders, mutilations, the casual cruelty of the Harpes. They claim they were forced to participate, that they lived in constant fear. The court believes them. Or maybe the court just doesn't want to execute women and children. Either way, they're released. Susan Roberts, Big Harpe's wife, disappears from history. Some accounts say she died in poverty. Others say she remarried and lived a quiet life. Nobody knows for sure. The children, including one fathered by Micajah Harpe, were taken in by other families. Imagine growing up knowing your father was America's first serial killer. Imagine carrying that legacy. The body count. After Big Harpe's death, authorities try to piece together the full extent of the brothers' crimes. They interview survivors, examine evidence, try to connect unsolved murders to the Harpes. The confirmed body count, at least 40 people. Some estimates go higher, 50, even 60. But here's the thing about the frontier in 1799. Record-keeping was minimal. Communication between settlements was limited. How many bodies were never found? How many killings were attributed to accidents or animals when they were actually the Harpes? We'll never know the true number. The Harpes were killing for at least 2 years, maybe longer. They ranged across hundreds of miles of wilderness. There could easily have been more victims than we know about. What we do know is that their murder spree was unprecedented in American history. Nothing like it had been seen before. Little Harpe's return. The story doesn't end with Big Harpe's death, because Wily Harpe is still out there. For several years, Little Harpe drops off the historical record. He's probably laying low, using a false name, avoiding the regions where he's known. The frontier is big. A man can disappear if he wants to, but Wily Harpe hasn't changed. He's still a killer. In 1804, 5 years after his brother's death, Little Harpe resurfaces. He's joined up with Samuel Mason's river pirate gang again, the same gang the brothers had briefly worked with before. Mason himself has become one of the most wanted criminals on the frontier. The authorities have put a substantial bounty on his head, $2,000, a fortune at the time. Wily Harpe sees an opportunity. In 1804, Wily Harpe and another man ambush Samuel Mason and behead him. They plan to claim the bounty. Here's where it gets darkly ironic. They take Mason's head to the authorities to claim the reward. But one of the officials recognizes Wily Harpe. Someone who'd seen him years before, during his original rampage, recognizes his face. Little Harpe is arrested. He's tried for murder, not for the dozens of people he killed with his brother, but for killing Samuel Mason. He's convicted, On February 8, 1804, Wiley Harpe is hanged in Mississippi. Like his brother before him, he's decapitated after death. His head is displayed on a pike as a warning. Both Harpe brothers died the same way they killed so many others. Brutally, publicly, their heads taken as trophies. Why they were forgotten? Given the brutality and scope of their crimes, you'd expect the Harpe brothers to be as famous as Billy the Kid or Jesse James. But they're not. Most Americans have never heard of them. Why? Part of it is timing. They operated in the late 1790s and early 1800s, before mass media, before dime novels and newspapers could turn criminals into folk heroes. By the time American culture developed its fascination with outlaws, the Harpes were already fading from memory. Part of it is that they weren't romantic. There's nothing heroic or noble about the Harpes. They didn't rob from the rich. They didn't have a code. They just killed indiscriminately, savagely, for pleasure. They're not the kind of criminals a culture turns into legends. And part of it is that their crimes were so disturbing that people wanted to forget them. The Harpes represent something dark about the American frontier that doesn't fit the mythology. We like to think of the frontier as a place of opportunity, of rugged individualism, of good people building a new society. The Harpes reveal the frontier as it actually was: lawless, violent, and sometimes genuinely evil. So they were written out of the story. They appear in some regional histories, in obscure books about frontier crime. But they're not taught in schools. They're not part of the American narrative. The serial killer question. Were the Harpes really America's first serial killers? The modern definition of a serial killer is someone who murders 3 or more people over a period of time, with cooling-off periods between kills, and typically for psychological gratification rather than material gain. By that definition, yes, the Harpes fit perfectly. They killed dozens of people over years. They had periods of dormancy between murders. They killed for pleasure, not profit. There were certainly murderers before them, people who killed multiple victims. But the Harpes were different. They were methodical. They ranged across a wide area. They killed strangers with no connection to them. They did it for the thrill. They're the first documented American serial killers in the modern sense of the term. What's terrifying is that they operated successfully for years in a society with virtually no law enforcement. Imagine if they'd lived in a more populated area with better communication and organized police. They might never have killed at all because they would have been caught after the first or second victim. Or imagine if they'd lived in the truly remote wilderness, away from any settlements. They might have killed for decades without ever being caught. The frontier gave them the perfect environment. Isolated victims, no police, poor communication, lots of places to hide bodies. They exploited that environment to the fullest. Modern parallels. The Harpes operated over 200 years ago, but their story resonates with modern cases. The randomness of their victims, the lack of clear motive, the crossing of state lines to avoid detection, the ability to blend in when necessary. These are patterns we see in modern serial killers. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Dennis Rader, they all shared traits with the Harpes. The ability to present a normal face to the world while hiding monstrous actions. The pleasure derived from killing. The lack of empathy. The Harpes prove that this kind of predatory behavior isn't a modern phenomenon. It's not caused by violent movies or video games or social media. It's something that's existed as long as humans have existed. What's changed is our ability to detect and catch serial killers. Modern forensics, databases, communication networks, these make it much harder for someone to kill dozens of people over years without being identified. But in 1799, the Harpes had free rein, and they took full advantage of it. The final accounting. By the time both brothers were dead, the Harpes had killed at least 40 people, probably more. Men, women, children, infants. Some they beat to death. Some they strangled. Some they shot. Some they bludgeoned. Many they mutilated after death. They left a trail of terror across hundreds of miles of the American frontier. They traumatized communities, destroyed families, made the wilderness road even more dangerous than it already was. And then they were largely forgotten, erased from history because their crimes were too dark, too disturbing, too inconvenient to the American mythology. But here's why their story matters. The harps reveal something about human nature that we'd rather not acknowledge. That some people are born or made into predators. That some people kill not out of need or passion, but because they enjoy it. That civilization is a thin veneer, and underneath it, monsters can lurk. The frontier didn't create the harps. They would have been killers anywhere, anytime. But the frontier gave them the opportunity to express their nature fully. And dozens of innocent people paid the price. The warning. Today, if you drive through Kentucky or Tennessee, you can still find markers and historical sites related to the harps. Harp's Head Road still exists, named after the spot where Big Harp's head was nailed to a tree. Local historians keep the story alive. There are books, documentaries, walking tours, but nationally the harps remain obscure. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe some stories are too dark to become mainstream. Maybe we don't need to turn America's first serial killers into cultural icons. But we should remember them, not to glorify them, but to understand them. To recognize that this kind of evil has always existed, that it can emerge anywhere, anytime, that societies need to be vigilant, need to protect the vulnerable, need to take seriously the warning signs when predators emerge. In 1799, Micajah Harpe died with a knife at his throat, begging not to be decapitated. The irony probably wasn't lost on him. He'd mutilated dozens of people the same way. He'd shown no mercy to his victims, many of whom had begged for their lives. In the end, he received exactly what he'd given: brutality, pain, and death. And his head on a pike, a warning to anyone who might follow in his footsteps. That's the story of America's first serial killers. A story of pure evil on the American frontier. A story we've tried to forget. But forgetting doesn't make it less real. It just makes us more vulnerable to the next monster who comes along.